Greece is facing a population collapse worse than any other country. Crisis on the way. Greece is facing a serious demographic problem that could lead the country to a total collapse in a short time. When we talk about problems related to demographic crises and possible population collapses, we immediately think of countries like Japan, North Korea, and more recently, China. However, currently, a country is far surpassing all these well-known examples, undoubtedly becoming the biggest candidate to suffer a demographic collapse. We are, of course, referring to Greece, a case so peculiar that even Elon Musk echoed this story on his profile on X. For some reason, the small European nation, cradle of Western civilization and democracy, often goes unnoticed in most of the public debate. However, the truth is that Greece is a country full of peculiarities. In fact, did you know that Dom Pedro I himself was invited to be King of Greece around the time of Brazil's independence? That's right. Indeed, Greece usually stays in the footnotes of the news most of the time. Until, catching everyone by surprise, something very serious happens there. Just over a decade ago, Greece made the headlines because of its severe financial crisis, which even threatened to drag the entire European Union into its death spiral. The curious thing is that no one seemed to pay much attention to Greek fiscal issues, until the House of Cards simply collapsed. In fact, when it comes to unsustainable public debt, we always think of Japan, with its debt equivalent to 225% of its GDP. However, we often forget the runner-up, Greece itself, with a 205% debt-ex-GDP ratio. Moreover, returning to demographic issues, the truth is that the Greek population is decreasing steadily, year after year, since 2006. From then until now, the Greek population has shrunk by 1 million people. And that is because we are talking about a country that has only 10 million inhabitants. Yes, this is the size of the problem. Greece is visibly withering. Nevertheless, after all, what is happening there? What has led the Greek nation into this hole? The main factor is the same one that has been punishing other countries around the world: the drop in birth rates. In fact, the rate observed in 2022 was the lowest in the country in 92 years. The fertility rate, that is, the number of children per woman, plummeted from 2.4 in the 1970s to less than 1.4 today. To be sustainable, this rate needs to be at least 2.1 children per woman. However, Greece has a second factor that helps worsen what was already bad: its increasing mortality rate. It is even strange to talk about this issue regarding a developed country. However, the fact is that, since the 2010 crisis, and we will address this topic, the mortality rate has been rising in Greece. Nevertheless, from 2020, things skyrocketed. What could have caused this problem? What global-scale event began that year? Well, I do not know. I leave it to you to weave your own hypotheses. What is known, however, is that there have been reported increases in cases of heart failure, stroke, blood clots, and cancer, even in young individuals. That is, mortality is hitting, squarely, the most productive portion of society, which makes the demographic problem even worse. Nevertheless, without a doubt, the economic issue has to be put into this equation, at least as a third factor of importance. During the crisis that hit Greece in the 2010s, the Mediterranean country lost no less than a quarter of its productive population, who preferred to emigrate to other European nations. Most of these individuals were highly qualified people. Moreover, the lack of economic perspective led many adults of that time to choose to have fewer children, or simply not to have them. Today, 14 years after the start of the recession, the result has become visible. In numerous Greek villages, schools are completely empty. Some are simply closing their doors due to lack of children. In 2009, before the outbreak of the crisis, 118,000 children were born throughout Greece. In 2017, this number had already fallen to 88,000. Now, the Greek government is desperately trying to reverse this scenario through, guess what? State incentive programs, subsidy programs for large families, cheap financing of houses for young people. Financial incentives for assisted reproduction have already been idealized and carried out, and, of course, attempts to bring foreign labor to settle there. Obviously, none of this will work. After all, if it was the state that caused this problem, in the first place, it will not be the one to solve it. In addition, we are going to talk about the state's guilt. The truth is that, just before the health crisis, the Greek population problem was quite evident. In 2020, the government tried to contain the drop in fertility rates through subsidies, providing a bonus of €2,000 for the parents of each child born in the country from that moment on. At that time, it was even predicted that 36% of the Greek population would be elderly by 2050, if the scenario was not reversed. As the numbers show us, things have only gotten worse since then. Moreover, not even immigrants want to live in Greece. When refugees from Africa and the Middle East began to flood Europe, Greece was one of the main gateways to the old continent. However, practically no one stayed there. Immigrants went straight to other nations in Central Europe. It seems that everyone already knew that Greece had no future. In addition, the state is, indeed, the great responsible for this situation. The truth is that a growing public debt always turns into a population disaster because it distorts the social fabric. After all, the increase in state spending occurs when the state claims to be the great provider of society. In this scenario, children stop having an important function of assistance to parents, investments for old age. Who is going to pay for the retirement of the elderly will be the state. In fact, before the post-2010 crisis reforms, it was very common for Greeks to retire around the age of 57. In this context, having children becomes economically disadvantageous, becoming just a big nuisance. It turns out that all this increase in public debt severely penalizes the population. Even though we are talking about a robust economic bloc, like the European Union, with a solid circulating currency, the truth is that this spending spree needs to end eventually. Faced with Greece, two alternatives were put. Either spending is controlled, or the country is out of the rich bloc. This second choice would have destroyed the country still in the past decade. So, the inevitable choice was made. And then, the consequences were also inevitable. The Greek population, accustomed to living in the illusion of state spending, was thrown into poverty overnight. In 2014, one-third of the Greeks were already living in poverty. Almost half of the retirees, in turn, were below the poverty line. Unemployment, especially among the youngest, grew frighteningly. In addition, the prospects for an economic improvement in the medium and long term were practically non-existent. At that time, the Greek GDP plummeted by 25%. Although the country has rehearsed a recovery in recent years, the price paid by the Greek population, due to the crisis, is still very high. In this type of scenario, having children ceases to be an interesting option. Children are expensive, they do not bring financial return in the short term, and they overload household accounts. Budget restrictions turn into family restrictions, and that's exactly what happened in Greece. Unfortunately, this type of scenario ends up being cultural. The adults of the next decade are the only children of the past decade. They grew up with the reference of a small family. Hardly. They will seek something different from that. In fact, Greece will be lucky if these future adults still want to have at least one child. Healthier people with a more promising future flee countries with these characteristics, seeking better opportunities in other parts of the world. In Greece, therefore, the less qualified and less willing to pursue a life abroad remained. The country was left without prospects, and it is not state subsidies, bankrolled with money printed out of nowhere, that will reverse this scenario. When Elon Musk and others assert that Greece is indeed heading for a population collapse, they are not joking. The thing is really serious, and a future collapse is absolutely feasible. The circumstances that lead to the current Greek scenario, therefore, must be put on the state's account. The economic crisis caused by the Greek government expelled qualified people from the country, reduced families, and destroyed the wealth of the people. A decade later, arbitrary sanitary control measures may perhaps be blamed for the high mortality rates in the country. These unexpected consequences of state action definitely lead Greece to the bottom of the demographic pit. Moreover, from there, the cradle of Western civilization can only emerge from this tragedy if the state does not hinder it. If there is a solution for Greece, it goes through freedom and not through state action.